In this video, we're going to take a look at the second game that Frank Marshall won from Emanuel Lasker, played in one of the last games of Emanuel Lasker's career in 1940. And it was played as an exhibition match next to the 1940 US Championship. And Marshall, in his notes to the game in his collection of best games, he mentions how strange it felt for these two aged warriors to be playing next to the young guns of US chess at that moment. You know, great names like Reshevsky and Fine and Kashdan. It gave him a very strange feeling, you know, and he thought back to all the great tournaments that Lasker and he had played together, and all the great names from their generation. It was actually a very interesting game. And some very intricate tactics at some moment, which Marshall navigated better than Lasker. So let's have a look at it. It's well worth analysing. So after c4, we go back to a Queen's Gambit declined, the old-fashioned variation. Not the Lasker variation with knight to e4, which Lasker made popular, and which is actually thought to be a very nice equalizer at the top level. Queen c2 and c5, and this line has also been played at the top level an awful lot. It doesn't promise Black really any chances of winning, but it does set up a very solid position at the cost of an isolated queen's pawn. But in general, with the exchange of pieces and Black's easy development, you know, this is thought to be quite reasonable for Black. The normal way that Black proceeds here is to play a little bit more aggressively than Lasker did, something like this, followed by bringing the knight to e6 afterwards. Terribly sorry, the knight to e6 afterwards, and then the queen to f6, forcing the exchange of knights and just leading to gradually trying to flatten out the position. I mean, it's not fantastic fun for Black, but good players seem to be able to draw this, you know, with not too much difficulty. Lasker played a different plan, which is actually quite reasonable. I mean, he plays the queenside pawns to b6 and to a5, which consolidates the position of the knight on c5. And, well, you know, White's a little bit quicker to the c-file in this position, so Black just blocks it. The pawns are placed on squares that are different to the light squared bishop, which is you know, just as Capablanca recommends it. And Black's idea is just to develop the bishop, get some major pieces onto the c-file, and then just exchange off pieces and neutralise White's advantage in that way. And it's a perfectly decent plan. And there's just an extra little threat here. Black's actually threatening to take the bishop on d3, and then play bishop a6 and win the exchange. Well, Marshall doesn't fall for that, and the game proceeds quite normally. Queen to f6, pretty decent move. Rook c7, rook c3, rook c8, rook c1, and queen e5. So, yeah, I mean, White's still got the advantage of a better pawn structure. You know, Black's still got his isolated queen's pawn on d5, but you know, not very much is happening. But with the next move, Marshall hints at a possible crisis, plays a3 and threatens b2 to b4. And here Lasker rather made a mistake. And I think he just forgot for a moment what the plan was, why Black has actually played the way that he's played. That knight on c5 was, in a way, a temporary measure, you know, blocking the c-file until Black had neutralised it. But once Black's neutralised the c-file, then that knight, you know, can actually move away. And I think a move like knight e6 would have been, you know, very, very sensible here. I mean, you know, even if White manages to exchange off, you know, all the pieces except the bishops and get a good bishop against bad bishop ending, the fact that Black's put the pawns on dark squares, b6, a5, means that Black's never going to be tied down with his bishop to any weaknesses on the queen side, and you know, Black should be able to hold this you know, without too many difficulties. You just got a good queenside pawn structure there. You know, it's not not a question of black playing for a win, of course, in this position, but you know, I mean, a draw with black is also fine. But what Lasker did was he played a4, which really goes all out to try and maintain the knight on c5. And he does this by stopping b2 to b4. The only point about it is that it places a queenside pawn on a light square, which is easy for white to attack, and that pawn is actually quite exposed. And it also means that the knight can never move away from c5. So yeah, black's kind of fossilized his position by playing a5 to a4. And I mean, it's fine if, I suppose, if you know, he can hold this a pawn on a4 without too much difficulty. But actually, well, as we'll see, Lasker runs into tactical problems almost immediately as Marshall discovers a very sharp tactic. So Marshall went bishop b5, and Lasker played a move that looks natural, but actually is tactically vulnerable. He went rook a8, and here Marshall played the quite beautiful bishop takes a4, rook takes a4, and then b4. So what's the idea of this tactic? Well, obviously white's threatening to take the knight on c5 and regain the piece. And the idea is essentially that you know, even if black managed to you know, capture the a3 pawn in return, if white gets some sort of structure with you know, rook and knight against rook and this terrible bishop on b7, and then can actually also attack this this bishop with the rook, well, I mean, it's going to be a very unpleasant ending for black. But this tactic is actually quite a fraught one, because yeah, there are a number of confusing little points to it that you don't actually notice at first sight. I mean, I think the first thing to point out is that if you go knight e6 in this position, then rook c7, knight c7, queen c2 forks the rook on a4 and the knight on c7, and after rook a3, queen c7, we've got a pretty horrific scenario here where well, bishop a6 allows b5, so the bishop has to retreat to a8. And, well, I mean, the difference between the minor pieces is huge. You know, this bishop on a8 is never going to get into play, and white's just going to advance the kingside pawns and bring the king in. It's just going to be an easy win for white. So that's one of the key ideas. However, what you might not appreciate straight away is that actually the move that Lasker played, queen e8, is a little bit more than just a retreat, because if white takes on c5, then rook takes d4 exploits the pin of the queen on the pawn on e3. White can't play e takes d4 because of queen takes e2. So black actually wins a piece. So after this move queen e8, for example, then yeah, white isn't actually threatening to regain the piece at all. The only problem for black is that yeah, black isn't actually threatening to move the knight away from c5, and white has got a lot of ways of increasing the pressure on the knight. Actually, I think the very best way to have played in this position would be to have played queen b5, and after a move like queen b5, knight b5, let's say rook d7, takes rook c5, then well, white's a pawn up. Black can try and you know, get the a pawn back, but then white wins the d pawn in return, and this is a rather unpleasant ending for black. Yeah, I mean, white's just going to consolidate, swap off a pair of rooks, and then bring the king in and advance the kingside pawns, and it's going to be quite a tricky one to defend. I mean, the knight's very strong when all the pawns are on one side, and the bishop is less impressive. So this would just be a very unpleasant ending for black to defend. There are other moves as well. I mean, queen d1 is another nice one. You know, sort of getting out of this rook takes d4 trick, again threatening b takes c5, and also attacking the rook on a4. But Marshall actually made a mistake here. He played Queen C2, which looks very, it looks very logical. Get out of this Rook takes D4 trick pin, attack the Rook on A4, and well, triple up on the knight on C5. However, in this position, well, Lasker actually blundered completely, but he still had a saving resource here, which was Rook A8, with the cunning point that after B takes C5, Black goes B takes C5, and if Rook C5, Queen C5, then Black plays Rook C8 and picks up the Rook on C1. Surprised that Lasker didn't see this, because this was, in his heyday, he would definitely have seen this, because this was the sort of tricky defence that he was famed for. So yeah, I mean, a couple of a strategical mistake from Lasker, A4, and then this very sharp tactic from Marshall, but implementation was not quite 100% right. But as it is, after Queen C2, Lasker panicked and played Rook E7. And after takes, Rook takes, he played the sacrifice Rook E3, which is, yeah, rather poor. Marshall gives the nice line Rook A3, Queen B2, Queen A4. It's a rather helpful line, actually. Takes, Rook C8, King G7, and now can you spot it? C8, it, Knight F5, checkmate, which is very nice. I don't think I've seen a checkmate quite in this way before. Lasker went Rook takes E3, which gains enough material in a way, or some material for the exchange. But that again, that bishop on B7 is the key problem. It's not getting out. And White's just threatening Rook C7 in this position. I mean, Lasker played a couple more moves, but resigned after this. The A-pawn is just going to queen. So, an interesting game. Actually, yeah, I mean, I think Marshall showed enough quality in this game to definitely deserve to win it, despite this tactical imprecision. But this was, I thought it was a very, very nice strategical thing, first of all, that, Black lost sight of what that knight on c5 was doing. It's not there to remain there forever. It's simply to block the c-file until Black's ready to, to counter White's pressure there. And then when Black sort of transformed the goal of the knight, he actually fossilized his position. And what's amazing is that there were just so many tactical possibilities in this position. And yeah, it's a very sharp tactic from Marshall. It's not completely obvious that because Black has got this this idea of B takes C5, Rook takes D4. It's not completely obvious that this is going to work, but yeah, it all seems to hang together in all sorts of variations. And after yeah, Queen E8, Queen C2, mistake there, but then Lasker's mistake, Rook E7. Then yeah, Marshall was in the driving seat and didn't have to work too hard to win the game. Anyway, that was Marshall's only his second career victory against Lasker, but a very good one, as I'm sure you agree. And well, I suppose in the next episodes we'll be having a look at Lasker's wins, all 12 of them, and also some thrilling draws as well.